Well, as we're reaching the end of our semester here, it's only appropriate that we take a look at what's involved in terminating treatment relationships with your clients and the kinds of things that you might want to evaluate and how you go about that evaluation. This is really a brief overview of some of the bigger issues that surface during this phase of your work with your clients. And as you can gather from this opening slide, I'm taking bits and pieces from each of these three textbooks. Again, there's a fair amount of overlap in some of the things they say, but they each have little things to contemplate as we go through this process with our clients. So uh, let's kind of take a look at this. One of the things about ending your relationships is, we have this kind of picture in our head, I think, that as we start out or work with clients, that we're going to have some sort of control over how the treatment relationship ends. Uh, and not only that you control it, but that your client also has positive input in it, and the two of you kind of reach an agreement together, and everybody's happy. And while that does happen sometimes, don't get me wrong, you'll have plenty of opportunity to see that occur. There's going to be a lot of other times when things just don't end quite so neatly, and you don't always get to plan your endings, and sometimes they are planned. For instance, when you've met the objectives of the whatever the intervention was determined to achieve, and you've made arrangements to maintain those positive outcomes, whatever it is that the client has achieved, so that the client can leave you and there can be some confidence that the positive changes will continue. um, and or you may be making referrals to other individuals, other professionals, other agencies to assist the client in consolidating further gains. You might have been only able to offer a certain approximation of what the client needed, and so then you have to decide what next steps the client's going to take. Is the client going to look for other alternatives to make the changes, or the client taking steps to make changes in his or her life that don't involve treatment, looking for another professional perhaps, whatever it might be. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of times, particularly when you're in a professional relationship where there is a fee for service and insurance companies become involved, managed care may limit the amount of times that you can see a client, and so um, you may not be prepared. You may not want to terminate the treatment, and the client may not want to terminate treatment. But sometimes your insurance companies are going to say, well, that's all you get for this particular kind of problem. Likewise, if you're not in a relationship where the client is paying you for service, but let's say you're in a public agency, caseload size or the dictates of your particular type of relationship that you have, your role with your client, may also require that your treatment relationship be ended, even though you may have other work you want to do. For instance, in child protection, there's the work is divided at least into two or three phases. That there's the initial assessment, and then there's the ongoing work, the family services work if children are removed from the home. And so the initial assessment or IA work or um, uh, only has a certain amount of time, 30 to 45 days generally, in order to do what they're going to do, and then the family gets passed along to another worker. And so there's all sorts of reasons why your treatment relationship is going to come to an end, and it isn't always because all the goals have been achieved. And sometimes you'll have clients that just drop out. Now, in public agencies, that's less. Well, sometimes clients can drop out in public agencies as well, but public agencies, that's probably less likely to happen because sometimes your clients are involuntary clients, and you'll go seek them if they don't come to you. But sometimes when clients are coming to you, they're going to drop out in an unexpected way, and you'll see that happen often enough. And sometimes it's just one meeting is all it's going to take with your client as well. So there may be all sorts of things, and at the same time you may have other clients, as this slide suggests, that wants or needs ongoing support over an extended period of time, and sometimes you're not able to do that, sometimes you are. But you should begin planning for endings from the very first meeting. You want to have a conception in your mind of, as you look into the future with this client, as to what kind of time period you're going to be engaging with the client, and talk that over some with the client so that your client has an idea of what to anticipate as well. If you haven't followed a process that plans for endings, a lot of times you find people become very uncomfortable or unhappy with each other because it just seems like you're kind of mired in this process that never seems to come to an end. And so it's always a good idea to kind of have that, well, the light at the end of the tunnel, or however you want to phrase it, however you want to look at it, have that ending in mind. If Now, sometimes clients will discontinue service really before you are ready to have them discontinue that service if they feel like, well, first of all, if your intervention isn't of value to them, obviously that's one reason, or if they feel as though somehow they're being ignored or mistreated or patronized or not understood properly or whatever, they may also want to separate from their relationship with you. But a lot of times there are other kinds of reasons these unplanned services, I'm sorry, unplanned endings of services occur. And here's some examples of the things that kind of set that up. That if you don't have a purpose in mind for these meetings, you want to identify that so the client has an understanding of why they're coming, why they're attending these meetings with you. If your own expectations of the client's participation, and for that matter, if the client has an opportunity to express expectations of you, if they haven't been described, again, that creates a fair amount of uncertainty and anxiety that encourages people to leave the treatment relationship. If you're not watching and identifying progress, it can be very discouraging. If the outcomes you're pursuing isn't of interest or isn't of importance to the client, doesn't fit in with their values or with what they want, that's another reason why you may wind up losing a client. If you haven't agreed upon that time frame for an ending, so that your expectations of how long this relationship is going to go on may be very different from the client's. If the recommended plans aren't acceptable to the client or the significant others, and that's an important piece there. You want to make sure that if because as changes occur with clients, changes are going to occur in their relationships with other individuals, and well, the significant others may not necessarily be involved in approving your intervention with the client, because that's between you and your client most often. If the significant others in that client's life don't have a buy-in to the changes that are occurring, that there's all sorts of things that they can and oftentimes will do to discourage the continuation of that relationship. So keep that in mind. You want to make sure that the important people in the client's life also are supportive of your intervention. If there are issues in your relationship with the client, we've talked about what some of those issues might be in previous lectures, I believe. Sometimes your client moves or becomes ill. I remember a consulting psychiatrist at the mental health center in Kenai. This is some years ago. This a guy came down from Anchorage, was very psychotherapy, Freudian kind of orientation, and not all psychiatrists have that orientation at all, but this fellow certainly did, and his treatment approach really was one of those old time psychiatric kind of approaches, where he had a client on the couch for years, literally, mining through all sorts of things from the client's childhood and the unconscious and all those kinds of things. Very traditional kind of psychotherapy, and he made mention of the fact that this one particular client he had worked with for 3.5, 4 years, something like that, and her husband took a transfer to New York City, and so she announced to him that she was going to have to terminate the relationship with him in Anchorage because the family was moving, and that he told me that he had to have a session confronting her for her lack of desire to resolve the issues because she was leaving the treatment relationship before things were done. And this was after a long, long time. So you're not going to have that kind of enduring relationship with the client, but we don't do that anymore anyway. And I don't think social work ever did do that. But in any event, sometimes in short notice, your clients may move, and because just by virtue of the kinds of situations you encounter, sometimes client relationships or client situations are very unstable. Sometimes you might become ill and have to transfer the case. And then, there are going to be situations where you're going to have a client that's active with you who dies. And I can think of, well, just off the top, I can think of a couple of my of clients that I worked with during the course of the various settings that I've worked in over the years. And you know, I still remember the moment I heard that the client had passed away, who told me, how I was told, um, and what I did after that. And in one of those cases I'm thinking about was, well, 30 years ago, and the other one was 40 years ago, I think. And I still find myself sometimes thinking about those clients. Both of them were teenagers. And I know there were other situations. I've had other clients that have passed away while I was working with them, but it's not like you have this happen a lot of times. But when you do, you have to understand that it's going to be a loss for you. Uh, your relationship with your client isn't one of those things of a friendship or an affectionate relationship where we know that we have to deal with the loss of persons that are close to us in our personal life. But I think sometimes we have this impression as professionals that we shouldn't have an attachment that would, well, maybe we don't, but I think some people would expect that we're removed from an emotional response to the loss of a client. But the fact of the matter is that you've had a relationship with that client where uh, very possibly your client has spoken with you about things that they've never spoken with other people about, and about things that you don't talk to other people about in your own life. And so even though it isn't a personal intimate relationship, it is a professional intimate relationship in many respects. And when you lose that suddenly, it's something you need to grieve. And so be sure you allow yourself that, and you know don't expect anything superhuman of you in terms of how you deal with that or respond to it, but understand you're going to have personal human feelings to that loss just as much as you would if it was somebody in your personal life, and permit those feelings in your life. So we use our skills, our professional skills, to conclude working relationships with clients in ways that are beneficial to them. And in the process of ending this relationship, you're going to summarize what the work has been about and the kinds of things that occurred during the treatment relationship, and also look for ways to stabilize the changes that have been achieved, and how to maintain them or sustain those changes over time. These are some of the things that you're going to be doing as you work on ending your relationship. If you have follow-up sessions, um, you sometimes that's something that can also help in successfully terminating and encouraging maintenance. Um, I'm not sure technique in ensuring successful termination and change maintenance. I'm not quite sure what I was thinking when that got typed, but in any event, understand that there is some technique in ensuring successful termination. Follow-up sessions is just one way of doing that, I think, and where sometimes you just schedule people to come back and to meet with you again, but you don't often have the luxury to do that for various reasons, because in some agencies, when you close the case is closed, and you have to go through a whole intake process to see a client again. Other agencies are more flexible with that. And certainly as a private individual, if you have your own office, you have all those kinds of things you can do. And it doesn't necessarily mean a meeting. You can just arrange to have periodic telephone calls to see how it's going, that kind of thing. Um, it's suggested that you have some form of celebration to kind of mark that the goals have been achieved, and that your relationship is reaching a conclusion. This treatment relationship, this is sort of in a sense, an unnatural relationship in the life, and so your goal is really to only stay in as long as you need to, and to step out so that the client can go on with his or her life, And so that may be something to celebrate. When I worked in residential treatment in a behavior treatment program, I can remember when there was the kids that we worked with there had certain goals they had to achieve, and over a period of time, and when they achieved those goals, then they went home, and we would often take the kids out for a dinner or something, before they went home, to celebrate their the completion of all their goals, and pat them on the back and those kinds of things. It's kind of a nice thing that helps them to remember more positively what what occurred in your relationship. And in the process of doing this, make sure that you give credit to your client for the goals and changes that or the changes in the goals that they have made in their work with you. Don't look to pat yourself on the back about it, at least not with them, but really, it's really their achievement, and you want to make sure that you see that. But even still, it can be very challenging to terminate your relationship with the client. So, two important things in ending are generalization and maintenance. And so, generalization is, the changes that the client has had behaviorally in a particular treatment setting needs to be transferred to the real life world out there. And so that's what generalizing is all about. In residential treatment, I remember that was one of those things we'd always worry about with those kids was, they were responding appropriately to relationships with adults and with other with their peers and things like that in the treatment setting, because they learned what they had to do in order to move through the program. But the question was, were they going to be able to take those changes and apply it at home where there wasn't such a structure around what they did? And that's generalization, both in terms of the changes that occur across behaviors, not just a specific behavior, but in general, they can generalize what they've learned to other kinds of behaviors that will help them succeed, and also behaviors occur across persons or situations. So from relationship to relationship, they continue to relate successfully with other people. And maintenance, then, of course, is that the changes that occurred continue to occur across time, not just that they don't stop after the your treatment relationship has ended. And there may be different procedures that we have to do to encourage generalization and maintenance. And one of the things, as I was talking about with significant others, that if their new ways of acting is going to result in changes in how others react to them, they need to be prepared for this. And as much as you can, again, if you can, prepare the significant others for these changes. And I think um, as time goes on, again, and I'm thinking in terms of the residential behavior treatment program that I worked in, where kids would do home visits after they reached a certain phase of the program, and we would get reports back from the parents, and we'd talk with the kids about how it went with their parents, and the parents about how they were doing. And again, the kids were more careful early on in their home visits generally, but then as time went on, they got a little more careless about things, and so it might be later. And in fact, a lot of times as they got very close to leaving the program, they'd really begin to louse up at home or in the program, and we used to, sort of this old idea that they got cold feet about leaving treatment, and that actually happens. So in any event, get ready for these kinds of things. Prepare your client, prepare other people around them for these kinds of things, and have a plan ready to deal with these kinds of changes in other persons as well. And again, with moving from a treatment program like that, then sometimes the well, that program had a thing where we phased them away from the points, and began to look at more natural reinforcement. And I think you have to look at the reinforcers in the client's real life situation and try to make sure that reinforcements do occur when they're no longer in the structure of the treatment program. Again, this is more about the generalizing, I think, that we talk about. How to encourage generalization and maintenance. One of the things that Gambrill says, I think, is to focus on changes in behaviors that are going to be reinforced in real life settings. So teach behaviors that will continue to be reinforced after your efforts end. That's called the relevance of behavior rule. Something that matters in that environment will get reinforcement from people. At least, well, not always, but if you can make sure that if it matters to, like if it's you're working with kids and it's parents that you're dealing with, for instance, or teachers that you're dealing with, be sure they know that they should be providing some sort of natural reinforcement for the changes in behaviors. If it matters to them, they'll be willing to do that. And make these new behaviors of value functional, that is that they occur in real life and that valued outcomes follow. Remember, behaviors have a function, and so we want to make sure that the consequences of those behaviors are something that is of value to the client. That again, that reinforcement really basically is what it is. What happens afterwards, the client sees things are better. Involve significant others. We've talked about this already because they're going to have a continuing influence with your client long after you're out of the client's life. Um, Recruit natural communities of reinforcement. Involve peers, involve other like self-help groups, for instance. If it's a substance abuse treatment thing, AA and NA are vital to recovery efforts, and so you want to make sure the client is engaged in those efforts to continue to reinforce their efforts to change. And trained loosely, multiple trainers, multiple models, multiple settings, multiple reinforcers, multiple sources of reinforcement, as many different people as you can be involved in this, so that they're not just trained to respond to you, or they're not always expecting to get praise from their worker, but that different kinds of praises can be helpful, different kinds of reinforcement can be helpful from a lot of different people. Try to move away from artificial cues and reinforcers. That's like that token economy system that I was talking about earlier, where you get points, and replace with social reinforcement as much as possible. Natural reinforcers, as much as possible, are the things that are probably most of benefit in creating behavior change. Um, Encourage beliefs about the causes of problems that encourage persistence, so that you know can the client see that he or she can make a difference, that what he or she does changes things, makes them feel better, makes her world respond differently, whatever it is. um, can the client understand that what the client is doing, what he or she is doing, makes a difference and results in positive outcomes for the client? You want to teach the client, train the client to see that they have some agency, that they have self-efficacy, that they can make things different through their behaviors, and help them understand that and teach them to see that in their lives, and that's going to encourage them to continue to make those positive changes. Identify high risk situations for relapse of problems and prepare the clients for those high risk situations. I'm thinking here, I worked with sex offenders in the mental health center for quite a number of years, adults and adolescents, and we use the relapse prevention model, which comes out of the substance abuse treatment field. And the and it's not just for sex offenders and substance abusers. You do this with batterers intervention as well. What are the situations that but let me just talk about sex offenders here. I mean, what are the situations where they are at risk for reoffending? Well, that might be sitting in the mall, or it might be, agreeing to babysit or whatever, those kinds of things. These are high risk situations, and so you want to have your client identify high risk situations so that they know what to avoid, and if they're put in a situation, they find themselves in a high risk situation, then have them identify various things they can do to cope with that, how they can deal with that successfully, so that they don't wind up relapsing. And that's a very important process for a lot of people that have, particularly these really kind of overriding, kind of strong um, um, problems, where there's like urges and things like, again, like in sexual offenses or in substance abuse addictions and things like this, to help them manage and maintain that basically is to help them see just don't even go near these situations, and it will help you a lot. I think about, if you ever watch, this is an old TV show, I'm dating myself now, but if you ever saw Cheers, was a classic out of the late 80s and early 90s. I think, it was on for years, a half-hour situation comedy. And Sam Malone was an alcoholic, a former baseball player who lost his career because of his drinking. And he gets dry. But what does he do? Is he buys a bar and he's serving alcohol to everybody. And I always thought that was really so incongruous. I mean that an alcoholic would be working in a bar and he stays sober. And talk about a high risk situation. It was kind of crazy. So again, follow ups, ongoing supports, booster sessions. It may not have to come from you. It could be volunteers or other social groups that will uh, support individuals in their change efforts. But follow up contacts is something that is very important. So evaluation, is useful at this stage because it measures the change in the client. It's helpful for the client to see that, to know where they were when they came in, to see where they are now, so that they see their efforts have resulted in positive growth. Um, Measures your client's satisfaction. It's good feedback for you. Um, it helps assure your accountability so that you can um, you can demonstrate that that the client's time with you was worth their effort. It helps you monitor the effectiveness of your services and evaluate the impact of your interventions. These are things that are helpful feedback to you in determining how you want to go about things in the future. You focus on outcomes, where the goals achieved and those kinds of things. The process, what were the aspects of that helping process that was most useful for your client, or that set your client back? And these again are things that very important for you to know and to listen to, because it can help you in figuring out a course for the future with other clients. And again, measuring your client satisfaction and how you went about achieving those goals are all things that are very, very useful in 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 this evaluation process. Review the process a little bit. Just kind of look back on your relationship with your client between the two of you and focus upon the fact that it was a collaboration. Always make sure that the client gets credit for their efforts, or his or her efforts, and identify the strengths or positive aspects in your client that he or she can use, kind of in their little tool bags in the future, their toolbox for the future, that they know they can create change themselves without you in the future if you can help them identify the strengths and the positive things that they used in working through their issues with you. So this is really, when we talk about the reactions of clients to termination, I mean, there are many other forms of responses that people have when your treatment relationship ends. I mean, you talk about anger and denial and avoidance and all of those things. Sometimes you may have clients that can't seem to make it for their last couple of sessions or whatever, and because people sometimes have trouble ending relationships. And one of the therapeutic benefits sometimes to your treatment relationship with clients that are coming out of troubled relationships is that they oftentimes do not have a positive experience ending a relationship. A lot of us don't have them, in fact, and so the capacity to be able to say goodbye and to terminate your relationship in positive terms and to move on in life is something that can be very therapeutic in and of itself for your client. So keep that in mind as you terminate your relationship and work through the saying goodbye process with your client. There are other things that you might encounter along the way as you're beginning to wind down your relationship. And one of the things that happens with clients that have a lot of anxiety about ending the relationship with someone who's been helpful in them achieving progress is that old problems begin to occur again, or new problems come up, and it isn't necessarily, it probably is not even a conscious attempt on their part to prolong the need to maintain contact, but it could be an indication that the client's having a lot of anxiety about that termination, and so my suggestion to you is to process that with your client, bring that to the surface, and talk it over and see if you can identify some of those fears and alleviate those fears in a healthy manner. You, as a worker, are going to have your own reactions to terminating your relationship, and I want to mention first of all the um, relief is in this list, because the fact is you're always going to have a client or clients who you don't really enjoy your contact with. You don't like working with them. May not really even like them as an individual. Yes, you're a professional, but yes, you are also a human being, and so you're going to have feelings like that sometimes. And again, don't be shocked, and don't be too down on yourself if you're not so unhappy about the relationship coming to an end. But very often, that's not going to be the feeling that you have, and you're going to find sometimes sadness and some of your own difficulty in letting go. So worry for your client, perhaps. Occasionally, we get a little over invested in the client's progress, and there's all sorts of different kinds of feelings you're going to have as well. So just recognize them as a natural part of the process for you as well. And maybe you have a mentor or a supervisor or a coworker that you can talk those things over with, and in a trusting relationship. So, the client's response to saying goodbye is going to vary. I think this comes from Hepworth. It's going to vary according to, the personal characteristics of the client, how long you worked with the client, what the issues and goals were. Again, as I mentioned, sometimes you're dealing with very intimate concerns on the client's part, and so that that kind of work is probably going to make it a little more difficult for the client to say goodbye than it might be. Then again, sometimes the clients may be relieved to be able to not have to discuss those things any further. I suppose it just depends on the nature of your relationship and what role and function you served in a client's life. Encourage your client to talk about their feelings in the end. Some clients are going to be better at that than others, and I don't think you by any means should expect that the clients are always going to have a lot of emotions to express, or appreciation to express, even for that matter. Some will just want to kind of bring the relationship to an end and move on, as this slide suggests. It depends a lot upon the how, the kind of characteristics that the client has, and how they deal with things like this. But you know give the client an opportunity to express emotions, even encourage that expression, um, and acknowledge their feelings, and help them say goodbye. And for yourself, I think you want to, as a professional in this relationship, you want to choose the feelings that you do express and how you express them with the client. But I think certainly be genuine in your own responses to the termination with your client as well. And then this I don't know, this may come from either Hepworth or the Kornoyer workbook, but as far as the closing summary is concerned, here is some of the information that is suggested when you write up a closing summary. This is going to depend very much upon where you work. If you're doing this in a private practice setting where you don't have a format to use that everyone follows, then this is a good example of the kinds of things you want to include in your closing summary. This is something that could very well wind up, depending upon the nature of your relationship, why the client comes to you, could wind up in their court record sometime, or in a probation and parole file, or something like that, in a child protection record. And so be careful what you do say in a closing summary, but be honest about it, and keep it, of course, very professional. Observations as much as possible. Diagnosing as little as possible. Kind of keep it. Um, well, just try to stick to observations as much as you can. So, and again, depending upon your agency, there are other formats that your agency may dictate that you use in a closing. So this is just one suggestion. So that sums up the kinds of information that I have about terminating relationships, and I hope that you find this to be of some help in working through this process. So let me know if you have any questions.